I have spent the last 30 years scrubbing the floors and wiping the dust from offices owned by some of the richest men in New York City, and not one of their sons ever saw the woman I truly was. Not even my own. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake before dawn in my tiny Queens apartment, where the sounds of the city, a distant honking horn, the muffled rumble of a subway train, the scent of fresh bagels from the corner bakery, fill the air. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cuts through my dreams at 4:30, and I feel the familiar ache in my joints as I swing my legs over the edge of my single bed. The mattress sags where I've slept alone for so many years, and the springs creak like old bones settling into another day of labor. I shuffle through my routines, the weight of years bending my back and spirit alike. My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows a woman I barely recognize anymore, gray hair pulled back into a tight bun, lines etched deep around eyes that once sparkled with hope, hands rough and red from decades of cleaning chemicals. I dress myself carefully in a faded uniform, worn at the elbows but still clean, and I leave behind the silence of 4 lonely walls for the sterile gleam of glass buildings uptown. The subway ride to Manhattan feels like traveling to another world. I sit squeezed between commuters in expensive suits, their faces buried in phones that cost more than I make in a month. They don't see me. To them, I'm invisible, just another cleaning lady in a sea of services they take for granted. The train lurches and sways, carrying me toward Midtown where I'll spend the next 8 hours making their world spotless while mine crumbles piece by piece. I remember walking into that high-rise office for the first time, full of hope. There was an invitation from my eldest son, a lunch, he said. "Mom, let's meet at my office building. I want to show you where I work," his text had read 3 weeks earlier. I had pressed that message to my chest like it was made of gold. My boy, my David, wanted to share his success with me. I imagined his smile, the possible warmth in his eyes as he introduced me to his colleagues. Maybe he'd say, "This is my mother. She's the reason I'm here today." But when I arrived at the gleaming lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, he never showed. My call went straight to voicemail. My texts remained unread for hours, then days. I stood there in my good dress, the navy blue one I'd bought at Macy's 3 years ago for his graduation, feeling smaller and smaller as well-dressed people flowed around me like water around a stone. The security guard looked at me with suspicion until I explained I was there to meet my son. His expression changed from suspicion to something worse, pity. I found only cold corridors and strangers' footsteps echoing off polished walls. The scent of pine disinfectant mixed with expensive cologne filled the space where love should have lived. That's when it hit me. I knew that disinfectant smell because I used the same brand in my own cleaning work. I was standing in a building I might clean someday, waiting for a son who saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment. That night, I sat in my kitchen under the flickering fluorescent light and ran my fingers over a photograph of my 3 sons, David lost in the skyscraper's shadows, Marcus and Tony fading from memory like old newspaper clippings left in the sun. In the photo, they were still children, still mine, still looking at me like I held all the answers to their questions about the world. You know what hurts more than being ignored? It's remembering when you weren't invisible. When little hands reached for you in the middle of the night. When scraped knees found comfort against your shoulder. When "mama" was the most beautiful word in any language. I raised those boys alone after their father walked out on us during a January blizzard in Brooklyn. I can still see the snow piling against our apartment window as he threw his clothes into a duffel bag, muttering about responsibilities he never wanted. "They're your problem now," he said, like my children were broken appliances he was leaving behind. The door slammed, and I stood there holding 3-year-old Tony while David and Marcus peeked around the corner with eyes too big for their little faces. That night began my real education in sacrifice. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria during the day, then cleaned office buildings until dawn. My hands cracked and bled from the harsh cleaning chemicals, but I wrapped them in bandages and kept working. Every penny I earned went into their mouths, their shoes, their dreams. "Ma, you're too old for this," Marcus once snapped when I handed him money for textbooks during his junior year at NYU. I was 48 then, my hair already showing silver threads, my back permanently curved from years of bending over scrub buckets. But I just smiled and told him, "Money's love, honey. This is how I show you I care." I remember the exact moment I decided to skip my own doctor's appointment to pay for David's interview suit. The lump in my breast could wait, I told myself. His future couldn't. I pressed $400 into his palm, money I'd saved by eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for 2 months, and watched him walk away without even saying thank you. The years blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Cold silences replaced warm hugs. You don't understand our world, they'd say when I tried to join conversations about their jobs, their friends, their lives that seemed to exist in a parallel universe where I had no place. The house grew empty before dawn as they built lives that had no room for the woman who had built theirs. I cleaned offices to fill the void they left behind. In those quiet hours when Manhattan slept, I found a twisted comfort in making other people's spaces perfect while my own heart collected dust. I scrubbed toilets used by men who made more in an hour than I made in a month, and I told myself this was dignity. This was purpose. This was love, even if the people I loved couldn't see it. I forgave their missed calls, their forgotten birthdays, their harsh words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're being dramatic, Mom," David would say when I gently mentioned feeling lonely. "We're busy building careers. You should be proud." And I was proud. But pride doesn't keep you warm at night, and it doesn't call you on Christmas morning to ask how you're doing. Marcus moved to a penthouse in the village and changed his phone number without telling me. I found out when I tried to call him on his birthday and got a recording saying the number was no longer in service. When I finally tracked him down through his law firm, his secretary told me he was unavailable indefinitely for personal calls. His own mother had become a personal call. Tony, my baby, got married without inviting me. I found out from a photo on Facebook that a neighbor showed me. There he was in a tuxedo, beaming beside a woman I'd never met, surrounded by people I'd never seen. They were cutting a cake that cost more than my monthly rent, celebrating a love that somehow didn't include the woman who had loved him first and longest. But slowly, like a fog lifting from my mind, I began questioning if I was just a wallet to them. A ghost haunting their lives when they needed something, invisible when they didn't. The thread that had held us together, that I thought was made of love, felt more and more like fishing line, clear, sharp, and designed to hook something and reel it in. Do you know what it's like to realize you might have confused being needed with being loved? To understand that for years, you've been a convenience store that never closes, always ready with whatever they require, never asking for anything in return except acknowledgement that you exist? The microaggressions started small, like paper cuts that don't hurt until you realize how many you have. Birthdays came and went, no cards, no calls. My 70th birthday fell on a Tuesday, and I sat by my phone all day waiting for it to ring. I had bought a small cake from the bakery downstairs, just in case one of them wanted to visit. By midnight, the cake sat untouched, and I blew out the single candle alone, making a wish I was too ashamed to say out loud, "Please, just remember I'm alive." My arthritis flared one winter morning, locking my joints in place like rusty hinges. I couldn't lift my coffee cup without crying from the pain, couldn't bend to tie my shoes. I called David from the emergency room at Mount Sinai, my voice shaking as I explained that I needed help getting home. "Busy with work," he said, his tone flat and impatient. "Can't you take a taxi?" A taxi. Like I was a stranger asking for directions instead of the woman who had walked the floors with him all night when he had colic. Like I was bothering him by needing him the way he had once needed me. Marcus's girlfriend, a thin woman with eyes like ice chips, came to my apartment once to pick up some documents he needed from his childhood. She walked through my home like she was touring a museum of poverty, touching nothing, looking at everything with barely concealed disgust. When she saw the framed photos of my boys on the mantel, she actually rolled her eyes. "He really needs to move on from all this," she said, gesturing at pictures of birthdays and graduations and Christmas mornings that apparently embarrassed her. But the breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when I opened my mailbox to find a bank statement that made my blood freeze in my veins. Someone had taken out a loan using my house as collateral. $50,000, gone, signed with my name but not my hand. When I called the bank, they confirmed that David had presented himself as my financial power of attorney, documents I had never signed, authority I had never given. I sat in my kitchen staring at that statement for hours, the numbers swimming before my eyes like accusations. My own son had stolen from me. Not borrowed, stolen. Because borrowing requires asking, and asking requires seeing the person you're asking as human enough to deserve the question. That night, I dropped my mother's ceramic cup, the one she'd brought from Ireland when she was barely 18, the one that had survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars and decades of my own careful hands. It shattered against the linoleum floor, and I knelt there among the pieces, finally understanding that some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. I stayed silent, tears falling like rain. I couldn't stop, sitting alone in my dim apartment as the city hummed outside my windows. The sirens and car horns and laughter from the street below felt like sounds from another planet, another life where people mattered to the ones they loved. That's when I whispered to myself for the first time, voice barely audible in the darkness, "I have the right to say no." The words felt foreign on my tongue, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. But they also felt true in a way that scared me. But fear clawed its way back almost immediately, fear of an empty home becoming even emptier, of total abandonment, of dying alone with no one to notice until the smell alerted the neighbors. What if saying no meant saying goodbye forever? What if they decided that a difficult mother was worse than no mother at all? I pulled out the old photos that night and packed them away in a cardboard box, each image a small funeral for hopes I could no longer afford to carry. Me pregnant with David, glowing with the promise of unconditional love. The boys as toddlers, climbing on me like I was their personal playground. Christmas mornings when "Mama" was the first word they called as they ran toward the tree. I stared into my cracked bedroom mirror afterward, and the woman looking back seemed like a stranger betrayed by her own blood. Gray hair wild from running my fingers through it, eyes red and swollen from crying, shoulders bent under the weight of a love that had become a burden instead of a gift. When I finally summoned the courage to confront them, it felt like preparing for war. I called a family meeting, the first time I had ever demanded anything from them instead of asking. "We need to talk," I said to each of them, my voice stronger than I felt. "All of us. Together. This weekend." My sons reacted like actors who had been rehearsing these roles their entire lives. David, my eldest, denied everything with the smooth confidence of a politician caught in a lie. "You're misunderstanding the situation, Mom. The loan was for your benefit, to help with your medical expenses down the road." I was trying to be responsible. Responsible. He used my house as collateral for a loan I knew nothing about and called it responsible. Marcus took a different approach, his lawyer training kicking in full force. "You're being ungrateful," he said, straightening his expensive tie like armor. "After everything we've provided, this is how you repay us? By accusing us of crimes?" Everything they'd provided, like basic human decency, was a gift they'd bestowed upon me instead of something I deserved simply by being their mother. Tony, my baby, deployed emotional blackmail with the precision of a surgeon. "If you keep making us uncomfortable like this, if you keep causing problems, we might have to stop calling altogether." "Is that what you want, Mom? To lose your sons over money?" Over money. Like this was about dollars and cents instead of dignity. Like asking not to be robbed was the same as asking for the moon. I was left gasping under their barrage, my pain dismissed before I could even fully express it. 40 years of sacrifice reduced to misunderstanding and ungratefulness and causing problems. They had turned my hurt into my fault so smoothly that for a moment, I almost believed them. But then something magical happened. My granddaughter Maya appeared in my kitchen doorway, Marcus's 12-year-old daughter, the child I barely got to see because her father found my presence disruptive to their household routine. She had been staying with me that weekend while her parents attended some business function in the Hamptons. Maya looked at her father and uncles with eyes that held wisdom no 12-year-old should have to possess. She walked straight to me and wrapped her thin arms around my shoulders, her voice clear as a church bell in the tense room. "I see you, Grandma. I've always seen you." Her warmth was a candle in the darkness, a spark of hope in a city that often felt indifferent to the pain of women like me. Someone knew I existed. Someone valued my presence instead of just my services. Someone understood that I was more than the sum of my usefulness. But Maya's hug also showed me something else, how far I had fallen when a child's basic kindness felt like a miracle. How much I had been starving for recognition that her simple words fed a hunger I hadn't even realized was killing me. That night, after my sons left with their justifications and their anger and their threats, I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I said no. When David called the next morning asking for money to cover his car payment, I listened to his familiar routine, the casual tone, the assumption that I would comply, the subtle guilt when I hesitated. "No," I said, the word dropping into the silence like a stone into still water. "What do you mean, no?" He sounded genuinely confused, like I had started speaking in a foreign language. "I mean I will no longer be your ATM. I mean I'm tired of being invisible until you need something. I mean no." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, the shaking felt less like fear and more like the vibration of an engine finally starting after a long, cold winter. That night, I slept in my apartment with the windows open to the soft hum of Queen's cityscape, feeling the cold October air like a balm on skin that had been burning for too long. The sounds of my neighborhood, dogs barking, teenagers laughing on the corner, the distant rumble of the 7 train, felt like a lullaby instead of background noise. I was aware of my own breathing, my own heartbeat, my own existence in a way that didn't require anyone else's permission or acknowledgement. Do you know what freedom sounds like? It sounds like the absence of a phone ringing with requests you can't afford to fulfill. It sounds like your own voice saying no without immediately adding apologetic explanations. It sounds like silence that feels peaceful instead of lonely. The next Monday, I visited a legal aid center in downtown Manhattan. The building was old brick and mortar, smelling of old books and fresh paint, filled with people who looked like me, tired, worn, but still fighting for dignity in a world that seemed designed to take it away. The lawyer who helped me was a young woman named Sarah who reminded me of Maya, all fierce determination and genuine concern. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, spreading my documents across her cluttered desk, "what your son did was financial elder abuse. We can help you recover your money and protect your assets going forward." Financial elder abuse. There was a name for what had happened to me. Real words that made it real, that meant I wasn't crazy or ungrateful or misunderstanding anything. I was a victim of a crime, and the criminal happened to share my DNA. Sarah helped me set up a power of attorney that actually protected me instead of leaving me vulnerable. She showed me how to freeze my credit, how to monitor my bank accounts, how to create barriers between my resources and anyone who might want to exploit them. For the first time in decades, I felt like someone was on my side instead of trying to figure out what they could get from me. I also enrolled in a therapy group that met every Tuesday evening at a community center on Roosevelt Avenue. The room smelled like coffee and industrial carpet, filled with folding chairs arranged in a circle like a support group you might see in movies. But the stories shared there weren't entertainment, they were survival guides written in the language of heartbreak. Maria, 73, whose daughter had emptied her retirement account to fund a business that never opened. Robert, 68, whose son had moved back home with his girlfriend and 3 kids, treating Robert like an unpaid babysitter, and ATM Janet, 75, whose children had convinced her to sign over her house, then moved her into a studio apartment and rented out the home she had worked 40 years to pay off. We were a club nobody wanted to join, united by the particular pain that comes from being betrayed by the people you would die for. But we were also proof that survival was possible, that dignity could be reclaimed, that saying no didn't have to mean dying alone. "The hardest part," said Dr. Williams, our group facilitator, "is accepting that loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them destroy you. That being a good parent doesn't require being a doormat." A doormat. That's what I had become. Not a mother, a surface for people to wipe their feet on before walking into their real lives. But knowing the problem and changing it are 2 different things entirely. Change, I learned, is not a single moment of decision, it's 1,000 small choices made over and over again, even when your heart is screaming that you're making a mistake. The next test came 2 weeks later when Marcus called, his voice smooth as honey, sweet as poison. "Mom, I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I realize we might have been a little harsh. Why don't we all get together for dinner? Talk things through like adults?" The old me would have jumped at the invitation, grateful for any crumb of attention. The old me would have spent hours cooking, cleaning, preparing, hoping this would be the moment when everything went back to normal. But normal, I was learning, had never been healthy. "Where?" I asked, my voice steady. "My place. Saturday night. 7 o'clock. Dress nice, Lisa's parents will be there." Dress nice. Like I was staff they needed to make presentable before company arrived. Like my regular clothes weren't suitable for their elevated world. The assumption in his voice that I would comply, that I would be grateful for the invitation, that I would never dare to inconvenience them, it all felt familiar as my own reflection. "I'll think about it," I said. "What do you mean, you'll think about it?" "I mean I need to check my schedule and decide if I want to come." The pause on his end stretched long enough for me to count my own heartbeats. "Mom, this is family dinner." "Yes," I said. "It is. I'll let you know." I didn't go. Instead, I spent that Saturday evening at the Met Museum, walking through galleries filled with art created by people who had been dead for centuries but whose beauty was still alive, still valued, still treasured. I stood in front of paintings that had survived wars and floods and fires, and I realized that longevity and worth weren't the same thing. Some things lasted because they were cherished. Others lasted because they were too stubborn to die. I wanted to be both. The family meeting finally happened 3 months later, not in Marcus's sterile penthouse but in a neutral restaurant in Midtown, a place with white tablecloths and soft lighting that made everyone look more civilized than they felt. The boys arrived together, a united front against the problem they saw me as becoming. David ordered wine without asking what I wanted, then spent 20 minutes talking about his latest business deal while I sat silent, watching him perform confidence for an audience of waiters who didn't care about his success. Marcus checked his phone constantly, sighing dramatically to make sure everyone knew how important and busy he was. Tony barely looked at me, addressing his questions about my situation to his brothers like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. "We're concerned about your mental state," Marcus finally said, setting down his fork with surgical precision. "This paranoia, these accusations, it's not healthy." "Paranoia? Like financial documents were hallucinations. Like theft was a delusion. "We think you might need professional help," David added, his voice carrying the patronizing tone he probably used with difficult clients. "There are excellent facilities for seniors who are struggling with reality." Facilities. They were discussing putting me away like I was a dangerous animal that needed to be contained. The woman who had raised them, fed them, sacrificed for them, loved them through every childhood illness and teenage rebellion was now a problem to be institutionalized. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out an old family photo, the four of us at David's high school graduation, me standing proudly between my three sons, all of us smiling like we had the world figured out. I had brought it to remember who we used to be, to remind them of when they loved me openly instead of secretly resenting my existence. But looking at their faces now, cold, calculating, impatient, I realized that photo was evidence of a family that no longer existed. Maybe it never had, and I had just been too desperate to see the truth. I held up the photo and, slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. Then in quarters. Then into pieces too small to ever put back together. The restaurant fell silent around us. Other diners turned to stare at the elderly woman destroying memories while her sons sat frozen in shock. "I will no longer buy love," I said, my voice carrying clear and strong across the white tablecloth and crystal glasses. "I will no longer pay for the privilege of being treated like a burden. Respect me or lose me." The tries to guilt me back into compliance started immediately. "You're breaking the family," Tony whispered, tears in his eyes that looked more like panic than grief. "I'm not breaking anything," I replied. "I'm just stopping pretending it wasn't already broken." "Mom, you're being dramatic," David said, glancing around at the other tables to see who was watching our family disintegrate in public. "People are staring. Let them stare. Let them see what happens when a mother finally stops accepting crumbs and asks for a seat at the table." Marcus tried legal intimidation. "If you keep this up, we'll have to consider guardianship options. You're clearly not competent to make financial decisions." "Try it," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Try to prove that the woman who raised three successful men, who worked multiple jobs for 40 years, who survived everything life threw at her, is incompetent to manage her own affairs. I dare you." But I was no longer that scared woman at the beginning of this journey, no longer the ghost haunting their lives waiting for acknowledgement. I was a fortress built from decades of sacrifices they couldn't see and a strength they had never bothered to recognize. We left that restaurant with nothing resolved and everything changed. They walked toward their lives, and I walked toward mine, and for the first time in years, those directions didn't have to be the same. Have you ever reached a point where the fear of losing someone became smaller than the fear of losing yourself? Where the thought of being alone felt less frightening than the reality of being ignored while surrounded by people who were supposed to love you? But the universe, it seemed, wasn't finished testing my newfound strength. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, when I was starting to believe that I could build a life based on my own worth instead of other people's needs, another blow landed that nearly knocked me back to where I started. It came in the form of a phone call from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, on a Thursday morning in February. "Anna," she said, her voice tight with embarrassment, "I need to show you something on the internet." She brought her laptop to my apartment and opened a social media page I didn't even know existed, some local community forum where people shared neighborhood gossip and complaints. There, posted for everyone to see, was a message from Marcus that made my blood freeze all over again. "Looking for recommendations for elder care facilities," his post began. "Dealing with an elderly relative who has become increasingly paranoid and financially irresponsible. She's making false accusations against family members and creating drama where none exists. We're concerned about her mental state and think professional intervention might be necessary. Has anyone dealt with similar situations? Any advice on facilities that specialize in difficult seniors would be appreciated." Difficult seniors. Like I was a stray dog that had outlived its usefulness. The post had dozens of replies, neighbors I had known for years offering sympathy to my son for having to deal with me. People speculating about my mental condition, sharing stories about their own, challenging elderly relatives, recommending institutions where I could be warehoused with other inconvenient old people. Mrs. Chen scrolled through the comments, her face growing more horrified with each response. "Anna, everyone thinks you're losing your mind. They think you're a burden on your family." Public humiliation spread like wildfire through the neighborhood I had called home for 30 years. Within hours, people were looking at me differently on the street. The cashier at the grocery store spoke extra slowly, like I might not understand normal conversation. The mailman asked if someone was helping me manage my finances. "Just making sure you're safe, Mrs. Rodriguez." I felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter that spelled "crazy" across my chest, visible to everyone except the person who mattered most, me. 2 days later, Marcus called with what he presented as an olive branch. "Mom, I've been thinking, and maybe we were too harsh the other night. Why don't we try again? Fresh start?" But I had learned to listen for what wasn't being said. His voice had that practiced quality of someone following a script, hitting emotional beats that felt calculated rather than genuine. This wasn't remorse, it was damage control. "I saw your post," I said simply. The pause that followed was long enough to confirm my suspicions. "What post?" "The one asking for advice about difficult seniors. The one where you told the entire neighborhood that I'm mentally ill and financially irresponsible. The one where you painted me as a burden you're heroically trying to manage." "Mom, that wasn't, I didn't mean, you're taking it the wrong way." "What way should I take it, Marcus? What's the right way to interpret my own son telling strangers that I'm crazy and need to be locked up? We're concerned about you. This behavior isn't normal." Normal. There was that word again, weaponized against me like it had the power to erase everything I knew about my own experience. But something strange happened as I sat there listening to his justifications. Instead of crumbling the way I would have 6 months earlier, instead of believing that maybe they were right and I really was losing my grip on reality, I felt a calm descend over me like a warm blanket. The sting of public embarrassment was real. The betrayal of having my private family business spread across the internet like gossip column material hurt more than I could express. But underneath those surface wounds, I found something I hadn't expected: certainty. I was not crazy. I was not a burden. I was not difficult for asking to be treated with basic human dignity. I was a woman who had finally stopped accepting unacceptable treatment, and their escalating attempts to discredit me only proved how threatened they felt by my newfound strength. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady as a river that had found its course, "I'm going to hang up now. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what this family has become, you know how to reach me. Until then, please don't contact me again." I hung up before he could respond, and this time, the silence that followed felt like victory instead of abandonment. Silence became my shield and my strength. When well-meaning neighbors asked if I needed help with my condition, I smiled and changed the subject. When David left voicemails full of fake concern and veiled threats, I deleted them without listening to the end. When Tony sent flowers with a card that said, "Thinking of you during this difficult time," like I was grieving instead of growing, I threw them away without a second of guilt. I held firm, my confidence unshaken by their increasingly desperate attempts to regain control over the narrative. This moment, this test of everything I had learned about my own worth, proved that my transformation was real, not a phase, but rebirth. Because here's what they didn't understand: a woman who has spent 70 years learning how to survive doesn't become stronger by accident. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment of being overlooked or undervalued had been teaching me lessons I didn't even know I was learning. How to endure. How to adapt. How to find worth that doesn't depend on other people's recognition. They had created their own worst nightmare, a mother who no longer needed their approval to know her own value. The rebirth didn't happen overnight. It began with small acts of self-care that felt revolutionary after decades of putting everyone else first. I bought myself fresh flowers every Friday, not because they were on sale or because someone might visit, but because I deserved to live surrounded by beauty. I replaced my worn-out furniture with pieces I actually liked instead of things that were practical or cheap. I hung new curtains that caught the morning light and made my apartment feel like home instead of a waiting room for a life that never came. On a Tuesday evening in March, I walked into a pottery studio in Williamsburg, the smell of clay and the hum of creative energy filling the air like incense in a cathedral. The instructor, a young woman with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, welcomed me like I was anyone else, not an elderly woman whose children thought she was losing her mind, not a problem to be managed, just a person interested in learning something new. "What draws you to pottery?" she asked as I settled at a wheel for the first time in 50 years. "I want to create something beautiful," I said, surprising myself with the simple honesty. "I want to make something that exists because I made it, not because someone else needed it." That first bowl I threw was lopsided and rough, nothing like the perfect vessels displayed around the studio. But it was mine. Every imperfection told the story of my hands learning a new language, my spirit discovering that creation was possible at any age, my heart understanding that it was never too late to begin again. I started attending jazz shows at a small club in Harlem, the music washing over me like baptism by fire and hope. I hadn't listened to live music in years, hadn't done anything that was purely for joy instead of necessity. But sitting in that dark room while musicians poured their souls into saxophone and piano, I remembered what it felt like to be moved by beauty instead of just moved by obligation. I reconnected with old friends I had abandoned during the years when all my time and energy went toward trying to maintain relationships with my sons. Margaret, who had been my college roommate 50 years ago and still sent me Christmas cards even when I never replied. Elena from the hospital cafeteria days, who had tried to keep in touch even when I was too exhausted to return her calls. These women welcomed me back into their lives like I had never left, surrounding me with conversations that didn't revolve around what I could do for them or how I was failing to meet their expectations. We talked about books and movies and memories, about dreams we had abandoned and ones we might still pursue. We laughed until our stomachs hurt about things that weren't particularly funny except for the pure joy of laughing together. "Where have you been hiding?" Margaret asked over coffee at a cafe in the village, her eyes sparkling with mischief that 60 years hadn't dimmed. "I forgot I existed," I admitted, watching steam rise from my cup like incense carrying prayers I hadn't known how to pray. "Well, thank God you remembered," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "The world needs more Ana Rodriguez in it, not less. The world needs more Ana Rodriguez in it." When was the last time someone had said my name like it was a gift instead of a complaint? When had anyone suggested that my presence was needed rather than tolerated? Maya started visiting more often, sometimes staying overnight on weekends while her parents traveled or worked or simply needed a break from parenting. But her visits felt different now, less like I was providing free childcare and more like we were building a relationship based on mutual affection instead of family obligation. We cooked together, my grandmother's recipes coming alive in my kitchen as I taught her how to fold empanadas and season arroz con pollo. We talked about school and friends and dreams, about the books she was reading and the artist she wanted to become someday. She showed me how to use social media in positive ways, helping me join groups for senior artists and community gardeners and book clubs. "Grandma," she said one Saturday afternoon as we sat on my fire escape watching the sun set over Queens, "why did it take you so long to do things that make you happy?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and its innocence. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes loving people too much can make you forget how to love yourself? That sacrifice can become a prison if you don't set boundaries around it? "I guess I thought making other people happy was the same as being happy," I said finally. "I forgot that I mattered too." "You matter the most, Grandma. At least to me. You matter the most." For words that redeemed every sleepless night, every unpaid bill, every moment of feeling invisible. Not because Maya's opinion was worth more than anyone else's, but because it was given freely, without conditions, without expecting anything in return except the privilege of loving and being loved. I started taking art classes at the senior center, discovering that my hands, rough and worn from decades of cleaning, could create beauty as well as order. I painted watercolor landscapes of places I had never been but dreamed of visiting. I sketched portraits of the pigeons that gathered on my fire escape every morning, finding dignity in their stubborn persistence, their refusal to be anything other than what they were. I joined a walking group that met every Tuesday morning in Flushing Meadows Park, women and men my age who had decided that being older didn't mean being finished. We walked at our own pace, stopping to admire flowers or feed ducks or rest on benches when our joints complained. But we kept moving forward, step by step, proving to ourselves that we were still alive, still curious, still deserving of fresh air and sunshine and the simple pleasure of putting one foot in front of the other. Do you know what it feels like to discover that you have options when you thought you had none? That being alone doesn't automatically mean being lonely? That respect is not a luxury you have to earn through sacrifice, but a basic requirement for any relationship worth having? I was learning to dance again with life, embracing the worth that had always been inside me but hidden beneath years of neglect and manipulation. The woman in my mirror looked different now, not younger, but more awake. Her eyes held light that hadn't been there before, a spark of self-recognition that no one else could dim or steal. My apartment became a sanctuary instead of a prison. I filled it with plants that required daily care because I was worth the effort of keeping something alive and beautiful. I bought pieces of art from local artists because I deserved to live surrounded by creativity and color. I installed better lighting because I was tired of living in shadows, literal and metaphorical. The holidays came and went without the usual drama of trying to create family gatherings that no one really wanted to attend. Instead, I volunteered at a soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, serving meals to people whose gratitude was genuine and immediate. On Christmas Eve, I attended midnight mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, surrounded by strangers who became temporary family as we sang hymns and shared the peace that passes understanding. I sent my sons cards but expected nothing in return. When David called on New Year's Day with what sounded like a prepared apology, I listened politely but offered no forgiveness that wasn't matched by genuine change in behavior. "Words are easy," I told him. "Show me through actions that you understand what needs to be different." He hung up angry, but his anger no longer had the power to devastate me. Anger, I had learned, is often just frustrated manipulation, the rage people feel when their usual tactics stop working. Spring came early that year, and I found myself noticing things I had been too busy or too heartbroken to see before. Crocuses pushing through sidewalk cracks, determined to bloom despite concrete trying to stop them. Children playing in playgrounds with the absolute confidence that the world was designed for their joy. Young couples walking hand in hand, still believing that love was simple and forever. I wasn't bitter about the innocence I had lost or the decades I had spent focusing on the wrong things. Every experience, even the painful ones, had brought me knowledge I couldn't have gained any other way. I knew now what unconditional love actually looked like, not the kind that demanded nothing and accepted everything, but the kind that honored both people in a relationship enough to establish healthy boundaries. 6 months later, I sit by my window watching a sunset paint Manhattan in shades of orange and pink that shift and change like watercolors spreading across wet paper. The city spreads before me like a living tapestry, millions of lights beginning to twinkle as evening settles over the boroughs. Somewhere out there, my sons are living their lives without my constant presence, and I am living mine without their constant demands. Those painful memories no longer cut like knives when I encounter them. They have become something else, evidence of my resilience, proof of my capacity to endure and eventually transcend pain that once felt unsurvivable. They are battle scars that tell the story of a war I fought and won, not against my children, but against the part of myself that believed I had no value beyond my usefulness to others. The suitcase by my door is packed and ready, not for escape, but for adventure. Tomorrow I leave for a pottery retreat in New Mexico, where I'll spend a week learning new techniques from master artists who see potential in these old hands. Next month, Maya and I are taking a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the museums we've been talking about for months. A glass of wine glimmers in the lamplight, catching reflections from the window and throwing tiny rainbows across my coffee table. I toast the woman I have become, the one who learned that love shouldn't require self-erasure, that boundaries aren't walls but bridges that allow healthy relationships to flourish. I think about the woman who stood in that office building lobby 3 years ago, waiting for a son who never showed up, feeling invisible and worthless and completely alone. I wish I could go back and tell her that the ending she was dreading wasn't an ending at all, it was a beginning disguised as loss, freedom wrapped in the clothing of abandonment. To anyone listening who recognizes their own story and mine, I want to say this: your worth is not measured by other people's neglect. Your value doesn't decrease because someone else fails to recognize it. The love you've poured into relationships that left you empty wasn't wasted, it was practice for learning how to love yourself with the same fierce dedication. Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful victories. Sometimes being pushed away from people who take you for granted pushes you toward people who celebrate your existence. Sometimes what feels like the end of everything is actually the beginning of everything you never knew you deserved. You are not too old to start over. You are not too tired to stand up for yourself. You are not too alone to matter. The sunset is just as beautiful whether anyone else is watching it with you, and your life is just as valuable whether anyone else is properly appreciating it. I learned to stop trying to convince people to love me and started living in ways that made me love myself. I stopped accepting crumbs and started baking my own bread. I stopped waiting for permission to be happy and gave myself the authorization I had been seeking from others. The cleaning lady who once scrubbed other people's floors while her own life collected dust has learned to polish her own existence until it shines. The mother who lost herself in the service of children who couldn't see her has found herself in the reflection of people who do. The woman who thought she was invisible has discovered that she was simply looking in the wrong mirrors. And you know what the most beautiful part is? Maya calls me every Sunday now, not because she has to, but because she wants to. We talk about art and dreams and the pottery pieces I'm learning to make. She asks my advice about school projects and friendship drama and what it means to grow up in a world that sometimes forgets to see women as fully human. But more than that, she sees me as someone worth knowing, not just someone related to her by blood. She is learning from my example that love is a choice we make every day, not an obligation we fulfill out of guilt or habit. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, useful until you weren't, loved conditionally until the conditions became impossible to meet? Have you known someone who spent so many years giving pieces of themselves away that they forgot there was anything left to cherish? Or maybe you're living it right now, reading my words and seeing your own reflection in my story. Maybe you're the one waiting by the phone for calls that don't come, making excuses for treatment you wouldn't accept from strangers, wondering if asking for basic respect makes you selfish or difficult or demanding. If that's you, I want you to know that it's never too late to remember who you are underneath all the roles you've played for other people. You are not just someone's mother or caretaker or solution to their problems. You are a complete person with inherent worth that doesn't require anyone else's validation or recognition. But as I sit here now, watching the city lights flicker like candles in the darkness, I realize there's more I need to tell you. Because healing isn't just about cutting toxic people out of your life, it's about understanding how you got trapped in those patterns in the first place, and making sure you never lose yourself that completely again. The truth is, I didn't become a doormat overnight. It happened slowly, like erosion wearing away at a coastline, so gradually I didn't notice until the damage was done. It started when I was young, maybe even younger than Maya is now, learning that a woman's value came from how much she could endure, how much she could give, how little she could need for herself. My own mother, God rest her soul, had taught me these lessons without meaning to. She had come from Ireland during the Great Depression, arriving in New York with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to survive. She married my father, a man who worked construction 12 hours a day and came home expecting dinner on the table and children who didn't dare speak unless spoken to. A good woman makes sacrifices, she used to say, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees long after she could afford a mop. A good woman puts her family first, always. She never complained about the bruises that sometimes appeared on her arms after my father had been drinking. She never mentioned the dreams she'd had of becoming a teacher, dreams that got buried under the weight of pregnancy after pregnancy, responsibility after responsibility. I watched her fade like a photograph left in the sun, becoming more transparent each year until sometimes I wondered if she existed at all or if she was just a ghost going through the motions of living. When she died at 68, too young, but worn out like a coat that had been worn too many winters, her last words to me were an apology for not being a better wife and mother. An apology. This woman who had worked herself to death trying to keep everyone else comfortable was sorry she hadn't done enough. I swore I would never end up like her. But patterns have a way of repeating themselves, especially when you don't recognize them for what they are. When I married my son's father, I thought I was choosing differently because he wasn't a drinker like my dad. But emotional absence can be just as corrosive as physical violence, and neglect can be just as deadly as aggression. He never hit me, but he also never really saw me. I was functional, useful, quiet. What more could a man want? When the boys came, I poured all my frustrated love into them, the way water rushes toward any crack it can find. They became my purpose, my identity, my entire reason for existing. When their father left, I didn't fall apart because losing him felt almost like relief. But I held on to my sons even tighter, as if love could be measured in grip strength. Looking back now, I can see how I trained them to take me for granted. I never said no because I was afraid of disappointing them. I never expressed anger because I thought good mothers didn't get angry. I never put my own needs first because I believed mothers shouldn't have needs that competed with their children's wants. I taught them that my time had no value by always being available. I taught them that my money had no worth by giving it away without question. I taught them that my feelings didn't matter by never expressing hurt when they treated me poorly. And then I spent decades wondering why they treated me like I had no value, no worth, no feelings that mattered. The hardest truth I've had to accept is this: I participated in my own invisibility. Not because I deserved it, not because it was right, but because I didn't know there was another way to be. I confused martyrdom with love, self-sacrifice with virtue, endless giving with good parenting. But understanding how I got trapped doesn't mean I was to blame for being trapped. The difference between accountability and self-blame is crucial. I can acknowledge my role in creating an unhealthy dynamic without taking responsibility for other people's choices to exploit that dynamic. I can recognize my patterns without excusing their behavior. The breakthrough came not just from saying no to them, but from understanding why I had so much trouble saying no in the first place. Dr. Williams, in one of our therapy sessions, asked a question that stopped me cold. Anna, what would have happened to you as a child if you had put your own needs first? The answer came immediately, viscerally: I would have been abandoned. If I hadn't been the perfect daughter, the helpful sister, the child who never caused problems, my overwhelmed mother might have sent me away. My volatile father might have decided I was too much trouble. In my child's mind, being needed was the only guarantee of being kept. That little girl inside me, the one who learned to survive by being indispensable, had been running my life for 70 years. She was terrified that setting boundaries would mean losing love, because in her experience, love was conditional on perfect behavior and endless service. But Maya helped me see something different. One evening, when she was about 13 and staying with me for the weekend, she did something that probably seemed minor to her but shook me to my core. She spilled grape juice on my new couch, the cream-colored one I had bought for myself after decades of owning furniture that was chosen for practicality rather than beauty. My immediate reaction was panic. Not anger at Maya, but panic that I might have to be angry at Maya. What if expressing displeasure over the stain made her not want to visit anymore? What if she told her parents I was difficult and they used it as another excuse to keep her away? But as I stood there with cleaning supplies in hand, watching this child I adored look at me with genuine remorse and offers to help clean up the mess, something clicked. Maya wasn't going to stop loving me because I had feelings about my couch being ruined. She wasn't fragile enough to shatter under the weight of my mild disappointment. And more importantly, she wasn't learning anything useful by watching me swallow my feelings to protect hers. You know what, Maya? I said, sitting down beside her on the stained cushion. I'm really sad about my couch. I saved up for months to buy it, and now it's ruined. I know you didn't mean to spill, but I need you to understand that actions have consequences, even when they're accidents. She nodded solemnly, her eyes filling with tears that seemed proportional to the situation, present, but not devastating. I'm really sorry, Grandma. Can we fix it? Maybe, I said. But even if we can't, that doesn't mean I love you less. It just means I'm sad about my couch. That night, as we worked together with stain remover and scrub brushes, something shifted in our relationship. She seemed more relaxed, more herself, as if my honesty about the spick had given her permission to be human too. We talked about mistakes and forgiveness and the difference between being upset with someone's actions and being upset with someone's existence. Later, as she curled up next to me on the still damp couch to watch a movie, she said something that stopped my heart. Thanks for not pretending you weren't sad, Grandma. It makes me trust you more when you tell me how you really feel. Trust. She trusted me more because I had been honest about my feelings, not less. The foundation of our relationship became stronger, not weaker, when I stopped protecting her from my humanity. This is what I had never understood in all my years of mothering. Children, and adults, don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be real. They need us to model healthy emotional expression, appropriate boundaries, and self-respect. They need to learn that love can include disappointment, that relationships can weather conflict, that caring for someone doesn't require erasing yourself. My sons had never learned these lessons because I had never taught them. I had shown them that love meant endless accommodation, that mothering meant self-erasure, that family meant one person giving and others taking without question or gratitude. I had failed them, not by being too little, but by being too much, too available, too accommodating, too willing to disappear into their needs. This realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant accepting that I had contributed to the very dynamic that was destroying me. Liberating because it meant I had more power to change things than I had realized. I couldn't control their choices, but I could control my own responses. I couldn't force them to respect me, but I could respect myself enough to set boundaries whether they liked them or not. The pottery classes I had started taking became more than just creative expression, they became metaphor and medicine. Working with clay taught me about the difference between flexibility and weakness. Clay that is too soft can't hold its shape, clay that is too hard will crack under pressure. The goal is to find the right consistency, pliable enough to be shaped, strong enough to maintain form. I had spent my life being too soft, collapsing under any pressure, unable to maintain my own shape when others tried to mold me to their needs. But the process of learning pottery showed me that strength and flexibility weren't opposites, they were partners. I could be open to relationship, responsive to others' needs, while still maintaining my essential structure. My first successful bowl, one that didn't collapse or crack in the kiln, sits on my kitchen table now, holding the apples I buy at the farmer's market every Saturday. It's not perfect, you can see the fingerprints where I worked the clay, the slight asymmetry that marks it as handmade rather than machine-produced. But it's beautiful in its imperfection, functional in its uniqueness, valuable because of its individual character rather than despite it. I started thinking of myself as a work in progress rather than a finished product, someone still being shaped by experience but no longer willing to be deformed by others' expectations. The woman I was becoming had room for complexity, grief and joy, disappointment and hope, love and boundaries all coexisting in the same heart. The seasons changed, and with them, my relationship to time itself. I had spent so many years living in service to other people's schedules, other people's crises, other people's deadlines. My time had been communal property, available to anyone who needed it more than I did, which, in my mind, had been everyone. But now I began claiming hours for myself with the same fierce protectiveness I had once reserved for my children's needs. Tuesday evenings belonged to my support group. Saturday mornings belonged to the farmer's market and my pottery class. Sunday afternoons belonged to long walks in Central Park, feeding ducks and watching families and remembering what it felt like to move through the world at my own pace rather than constantly rushing to meet someone else's demands. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me, even when they served other people. When the church asked me to coordinate the holiday food drive, a job I had done for 15 years running, I politely declined and suggested they ask someone else to take a turn. When my neighbor asked if I could watch her grandchildren every day after school because she knew I wasn't doing anything important, I explained that my time was valuable to me whether or not other people understood its value. The pushback was immediate and predictable. I was called selfish for the first time in my life, and it stung until I realized that selfish was just another word for having a self-worth protecting. People who had grown comfortable with my endless availability were suddenly inconvenienced by my newfound boundaries, and they wanted me to feel guilty for inconveniencing them. But guilt, I was learning, is often just the alarm system that goes off when you start changing patterns that don't serve you. The people who benefit from your self-sacrifice will always have opinions about your self-care. Their discomfort with your growth isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong, it's evidence that you're doing something different, and different can be threatening to people who profit from the status quo. Maya watched all of this unfold with the keen observation skills that teenagers possess. One afternoon, as we worked together in my small garden, another new addition to my life, planted in containers on my fire escape, she asked me a question that showed how much she understood about the changes happening in my life. "Grandma," she said, carefully transplanting seedlings into larger pots, "do you think Uncle David and Uncle Marcus and Dad are mad because you're different now, or because they're realizing they never really knew you before?" The question was so insightful it took my breath away. This child, barely 14 now, had identified something I was still struggling to articulate: the difference between being angry at someone for changing and being angry at yourself for never noticing who they really were. "What do you think?" I asked her, genuinely curious about her perspective. She was quiet for a moment, her hands working absently in the soil while her mind worked through the complexity of family dynamics. "I think maybe they're scared," she said finally. "If you're not the same person you've always been, then maybe they have to look at who they've always been too. And maybe they don't like what they see." Maya had put her finger on something profound. My transformation wasn't just changing me, it was holding up a mirror to everyone in my life, forcing them to examine their own roles in our family's dysfunction. My sons weren't just losing a mother they could take for granted, they were being confronted with evidence of how they had treated someone they claimed to love. This realization helped me understand why their anger felt so disproportionate to my actions. I wasn't just setting boundaries, I was disrupting a family mythology that had painted me as someone who existed solely for their benefit. In their minds, I was breaking character, refusing to play the role I had been assigned, insisting on being a full person instead of a supporting character in their stories. But understanding their perspective didn't mean I had to accommodate it. I could have compassion for their discomfort while still refusing to return to patterns that had been slowly killing me. I could love them without losing myself. I could hope for their growth without sacrificing my own. The hardest test of my new boundaries came during the Christmas season, almost 2 years after I had first said no to David. It was Maya who brought me the news, her young face serious with adult concerns she shouldn't have had to carry. "Grandma," she said during one of our Sunday phone calls, "Dad's been talking to Uncle David and Uncle Marcus about Christmas. They want to have a family dinner, but they're saying you can only come if you apologize for all the drama you caused and promise to stop making problems." The old me would have been devastated by this ultimatum. The old me would have spent sleepless nights wondering what I had done wrong, crafting the perfect apology that would restore peace to the family even if it destroyed peace within myself. But the woman I had become felt something different: clarity. Crystal clear, undeniable clarity about what was being asked of me and what it would cost. They wanted me to apologize for refusing to be stolen from. They wanted me to promise to accept disrespect quietly. They wanted me to return to my role as the family's emotional dumping ground and financial safety net, asking nothing for myself and grateful for whatever crumbs of attention they threw my way. They were offering me conditional acceptance in exchange for unconditional submission. And for the first time in my life, I could see clearly that this wasn't love, it was hostage-taking. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked, her voice small and worried. "I'm going to spend Christmas with people who love me as I am," I said, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. "And you're invited, if your parents will let you come." That Christmas Eve, my apartment was filled with the kind of laughter I hadn't heard in years. Margaret brought homemade tamales and stories about her latest adventure, a seniors-only cruise where she had learned to salsa dance. Elena arrived with her famous Tres Leches cake and photos from her grandson's wedding, a celebration she had helped pay for without resentment because her gift had been appreciated rather than expected. Dr. Williams stopped by after her own family dinner, bringing chocolate and the kind of professional boundaries that made her presence a gift rather than an obligation. Mrs. Chen came upstairs with her famous dumplings and stayed to share stories about her late husband and the garden she was planning for spring. And Maya, my beautiful granddaughter who had convinced her father to let her spend Christmas Eve with me, sat on my floor playing guitar, a skill she had been teaching herself, she informed me, because music was something that belonged to her alone. As we sat around my small table, sharing food and stories and the easy companionship of people who chose each other's company, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation disguised as love, not guilt masquerading as connection, but genuine affection freely given and gracefully received. You know what I'm grateful for this year? I said as we prepared to cut Elena's cake. I'm grateful that I learned the difference between being loved and being needed. I'm grateful that I learned the difference between family and relatives. I'm grateful that I learned it's never too late to start over. Maya looked up from tuning her guitar, her eyes bright with understanding beyond her years. I'm grateful that you taught me what it looks like when someone chooses themselves without being mean to other people, she said. I'm grateful that you're showing me how to be strong and kind at the same time. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, I sat in my living room looking at the small Christmas tree Maya and I had decorated together. It wasn't the elaborate production I used to create when I was trying to manufacture perfect holidays for sons who barely participated. It was simple, personal, decorated with ornaments that told the story of the life I was building rather than the life I was mourning. My phone rang twice that evening, once from David, once from Marcus. I let both calls go to voicemail. The next morning, I listened to their messages with the detached interest of someone observing weather from indoors. David's message was angry, accusatory, full of blame for my selfishness in choosing to spend the holiday with strangers instead of family. Marcus's message was coldly legal, informing me that my behavior was damaging family relationships and that I should reconsider my choices before it was too late. Too late for what? I wondered. Too late to return to being invisible? Too late to go back to accepting crumbs and calling them feasts? Too late to pretend that dysfunction was normal and abuse was love? If so, then I was grateful it was too late. I was grateful that the bridge back to that life had been burned. I was grateful that the woman who had raised them with such desperate, self-erasing love was too far away to reach anymore. I deleted both messages without responding and went to make myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and possibility. The calls stopped coming after that, not because they had forgotten about me, but because they had finally accepted that their strategies were no longer working. I imagine they told themselves stories about my mental state, my ingratitude, my selfishness. I imagine they painted themselves as victims of an unreasonable old woman who had somehow changed beyond recognition. And maybe, in their minds, that's what happened. Maybe they genuinely couldn't understand how the woman who had spent decades absorbing their emotions and facilitating their lives had developed the audacity to have emotions and a life of her own. But I wasn't unreasonable, and I hadn't changed beyond recognition. I had simply remembered who I was underneath all the roles I had played for other people. I had rediscovered the girl who had dreams before she learned to sacrifice them, the young woman who had opinions before she learned to hide them, the mother who had needs before she learned to deny them. The cleaning lady who had spent 30 years making other people's spaces perfect while neglecting her own had learned to see herself as worthy of the same care she gave everyone else. The mother who had loved her children by erasing herself had learned to love them, and herself, more skillfully. And you know what the most remarkable thing was? The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. My son survived having a mother who required basic human decency as the price of admission to her life. They were inconvenienced by my boundaries, frustrated by my newfound self-respect, perhaps even hurt by my refusal to return to familiar patterns. But they survived. And so did I. In fact, I didn't just survive, I flourished in ways I had never thought possible. Now, as I sit by my window watching another sunset paint the city in shades of gold and possibility, I want to tell you something that might sound controversial but has proven absolutely true in my experience. You cannot save relationships by sacrificing yourself. You cannot love people into respecting you. You cannot earn dignity through endless service. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. Family without respect isn't family, it's a hierarchy disguised as kinship. Sacrifice without appreciation isn't virtue, it's self-harm in the service of other people's convenience. The most loving thing I ever did for my sons was stop allowing them to treat me poorly. The most generous gift I ever gave them was showing them what healthy boundaries looked like, even if they weren't ready to appreciate the lesson. The most responsible thing I ever did as their mother was teaching them, through my actions, that women are full human beings deserving of respect rather than things that exist for other people's comfort. Whether they ever understand these lessons is up to them. Whether they ever apologize for the years of taking me for granted is their choice to make. Whether they ever develop the emotional maturity to have real relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care is their work to do. My work was learning to love myself enough to require love in return. My work was developing the strength to stand alone so I could choose my connections freely rather than cling to them desperately. My work was becoming someone I could respect so I could insist on respect from others. And that work, that beautiful, difficult, life-saving work, is never finished. Every day I wake up and choose again to matter. Every morning I decide again that my feelings count, my time has value, my presence is a gift rather than a given. Every sunset I watch from this window is a celebration of a life reclaimed, a self rediscovered, a woman who learned that it's never too late to start treating yourself like you matter. To everyone who has walked this path of painful awakening, who has faced the choice between being authentic and being accepted, who has learned that sometimes loving someone means loving them from a distance, you are not alone. Your courage to change patterns that weren't serving you, even when it cost you relationships that felt essential, is inspiring others to do the same. To anyone still in the thick of it, still wondering if you have the right to set boundaries with people you love, still questioning whether asking for basic respect makes you selfish or demanding, you have not only the right but the responsibility to honor your own worth. You are teaching everyone in your life how to treat you by what you accept. You are showing the children watching your example what love looks like, what strength looks like, what dignity looks like. The woman who started this story, standing invisible in that office lobby waiting for a son who never showed, couldn't have imagined the woman who's ending it. But she was always in there, that strong, worthy, remarkable woman. She was just buried under years of believing that her value lay in her usefulness to others rather than in her inherent worth as a human being. Your story can change too. Your patterns can shift. Your ending can be different from your beginning. The sunset is just as beautiful whether anyone else is watching it with you, and your life is just as valuable whether anyone else is properly appreciating it. As Maya likes to say when she calls me every Sunday, now from college where she's studying to become a social worker specializing in family therapy, thanks for teaching me that love is something you do, not something you endure, Grandma. Thanks for showing me that being alone is better than being lonely in bad company. The cleaning lady learned to polish her own life until it shines. The invisible woman learned to see herself clearly. The mother who lost herself in love learned to love without losing herself. And now, at 73 years old, with my window garden blooming and my pottery wheel waiting and my calendar full of choices I made because they serve my soul rather than someone else's convenience, I can say with absolute certainty, it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too old to start over. It's never too scared to choose yourself. The sunset is almost gone now, leaving behind the promise of another dawn, another day, another chance to wake up as someone who knows her worth and claims her space in a world that sometimes forgets that women like us, women who have given so much of ourselves away, are not just here to serve. We are here to live. We are here to matter. We are here to shine. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for reminding me, by your presence here, that none of us have to disappear just because some people find us inconvenient when we're visible. Share your stories in the comments. Like this video if it helped you feel less alone. Subscribe because your journey matters too, and we're better when we walk it together. The woman I was would have ended this story with an apology for taking up so much of your time. The woman I am ends it with gratitude for the privilege of being heard, and with hope that my voice might help you remember your